Redditors who have lived in a haunted house. What are your most unexplainable paranormal experiences? As a disclaimer, I realize this story leaves a lot of unanswered questions. I also understand that some people may take issue with my use of the word demon, since it carries a religious connotation. Not everyone shares the same beliefs. Some have none at all. But for lack of a better term, that's what I'll call it. Because I genuinely don't know what else to use. Edit. I'm no longer religious myself, but agnostic. I also know my story is extreme and sounds unbelievable. I get that, but I maintain that it's true. It happened in the middle of the day, and I was fully awake and aware when it occurred. It's a bit long, so bear with me. This happened when I was in my early teens, probably around 2004. I was living with my father at the time. He had just married a single mother who had 4 boys of her own, all different ages. The boy who was my age, let's call him Jordan, was the one I spent the most time with for obvious reasons. We didn't always get along, but for the most part, we were buddies. We had just signed an agreement on a new townhouse in an apartment complex, which, if you don't know, is essentially a big apartment with an upstairs and a downstairs. The house was completely empty at the time, but we had moved in anyway and hadn't brought all our things over yet. Our parents decided to take the little ones with them to run errands and leave Jordan and me home alone to hang out since we were older. We had a mattress and a television in Jordan's room with a Nintendo 64, if I remember correctly, hooked up so we could at least do something while we were there. Our parents drove away, and Jordan and I started playing the Nintendo to pass the time. Note that the house was 99% empty at this point. To understand the next part of the story, you need to know the layout of our bedrooms. The upstairs of the townhouse had 3 bedrooms for me and my brothers. At the top of the stairs, there was one large bedroom to the right. This was the little one's shared room. To the left was Jordan's bedroom, and my bedroom was connected to his, meaning you had to pass through his room to reach mine, which was an entirely separate room with its own door. Our parents' bedroom was at the very bottom of the stairs, just a few feet from the front door. We had shut the door to Jordan's room, the one that opened into the hallway, just for the heck of it, not for any particular reason. We were playing our game when all of a sudden, the door popped open on its own. Not thinking much of it, we shrugged and closed it again. But then it opened again on its own. It didn't burst open. It just slowly popped open, the way it might if someone quietly pushed it and peeked through the crack. Jordan and I started wondering if maybe the latch was broken or the frame was off somehow, causing the door not to stay shut. We kept trying it over and over, repeating the same process. Each time the door opened by itself, we got a little more nervous. Finally, Jordan suggested we go downstairs and just wait for our parents to get home. Downstairs, we lay on the floor and stared out the glass back door while we talked for a few minutes, trying to come up with some explanation. We decided the most reasonable possibility was that wind was somehow getting into the house and pushing the door open. But not long after we started talking, we heard a hideous screeching noise from somewhere nearby. It was loud, drawn out, and close, so close that we couldn't even tell what direction it came from. The only thing it reminded us of was a ring wraith from The Lord of the Rings. Jordan and I looked at each other, eyes wide as saucers. We tried to laugh it off, telling ourselves it was probably a neighbor using a loud vacuum or something mundane like that. Now genuinely scared, we decided to use some logic to settle our nerves. We double-checked every door and window downstairs to make sure everything was shut tight, then headed back upstairs. I suggested that we plug in a standing fan in the hallway outside our rooms and point it away from the door to push any stray air away from it. Remember, we were kids. and this felt scientific enough at the time. Once our experiment was set up, we shut the door again and stood inside Jordan's room to wait. We waited, and then the door opened again. Pop. Just a smooth, calm swing, like someone easing it open with their fingertips. We repeated the process a couple more times, and each time it opened, we bolted into my bedroom and peered back at it, watching the door stand there wide open as if nothing had happened. This time, we decided to put the stubborn thing to the ultimate test. We locked it. There was no way, absolutely no way, that door could open when it was locked. Impossible. Jordan stood back while I turned the lock, checked it again to make sure, and then hurried back to our little observation post in his room. We watched, hearts pounding like mad drummers in our chests, hands shaking, eyes glued to that door. And then it opened. The door frigging opened again. I locked that door. I know I did. And it still opened. Jordan and I bolted into the far corner of my empty adjacent room, completely panicked. But we also knew we had to keep testing it, because something was happening, and stopping now felt even worse. So I went back, locked the door again, shut it, and ran. It happened again, 1 or 2 more times. I'd lock the door, shut it, swear under my breath, sprint away, and the door would just open. The door popped open again, calmly, but with that same eerie firmness as before. I tiptoed through Jordan's empty bedroom, my eyes locked on the widening gap of the doorway. I could see straight into the hallway. And then something came. Through the door. I don't know what it was. I only know that I saw it, clearly. It was big, and made entirely of shadow-dark nothingness. No skin, no flesh, no fur or scales. Just a shape carved out of pure pitch black. It had 2 large, perfectly round, yellow eyes, like glowing marbles suspended in the dark. Its hands clutched the doorframe, wide palm and clawed like some kind of dinosaur, each finger unnaturally long. 2 thick tendrils sprouted from its head and draped down its back, like a Twi'lek from Star Wars. Or, looking back now, almost exactly like a Heartless from Kingdom Hearts. I saw it for 1 solid second, not more, not less. But that second burned itself into me. A wave of absolute dread flooded my insides, the kind of fear that feels ancient, primal, and wrong. I screamed. Jordan screamed. Before I could react, something shoved me, hard. A force I couldn't see, couldn't understand. Maybe we ran. Maybe Jordan yanked me. Maybe panic and gravity did the work. It's a blur now, years later. All I know is I ended up in the adjacent room, slammed against the wall, and sprawled on the floor. Jordan was crouched over me, crying and praying out loud, nearly incoherent with terror. My memory after that is a little blurry. I don't remember what happened between then and when our parents came home. I do remember we tried to tell them the story of what happened, but in classic parent fashion, they didn't believe a word we said. It went in one ear and out the other. I'm sure Jordan has forgotten by now as well. We moved 1 or 2 more times, and our parents divorced after only being married a few years. I've mostly kept this story to myself since. Story 2. My husband and I rented a very old house. We had to fix it up before my son came home from the hospital. He was extremely premature and spent almost 5 months in the NICU. We took down the wallpaper, painted, removed the popcorn ceiling, the whole 9 yards. The basement was very unfinished and had been vandalized by the teenagers who lived there before us. Swastikas everywhere. We never bothered fixing it since we did not need the space. I went down there once in the entire year we lived in that house. It had an awful feeling, like someone was watching you and angry about it. Sometimes that feeling would drift upstairs. I would wait a week or so, thinking it was just in my head, and then I would sit in the car with the baby while my husband burned sage to clear it out. He said the feeling while he did it was heavy and furious, and he would see figures coming at him through the smoke. There were countless experiences there. The two that stand out most in my mind are as follows. 1, I was showering and the baby was in a little bouncer seat in the doorway. I opened the curtain, and just as I did, the can of air freshener that had been sitting on the back of the toilet went flying toward my baby. If the door had not been slightly closed, it would have hit him. I went absolutely bat-crap crazy. I started yelling, telling them that if they were going to mess with anyone, they should mess with me. He was just a baby. On and on I went. As I was yelling, the detachable shower head suddenly flew off toward me, hit the end of its hose, and swung down. That shut me right up. 2, my husband and I were in bed, and my son was in his room right down the very small hallway, fast asleep. We had a baby monitor because he was on oxygen and connected to a pulse ox monitor, so I wanted to hear the alarm if it went off. My husband and I were lying in bed, talking the way we usually did before saying goodnight. We said our goodnights, and not even 5 minutes later, we both heard, clear as day, a little girl laughing through the baby monitor. My husband jumped out of bed, ready to kick some butt, but I already knew no one was in there. I was stunned, completely frozen until I eventually fell asleep. I do not miss that place. Story 3. I was around 16 when this happened. I was lying in bed, reading something. At first, the room felt normal. Then it started to feel really icy. Not that the temperature dropped, but the atmosphere felt cold, if that makes sense. It became deeply uncomfortable. Next, it felt as if something or someone was staring at me. There was nobody there, and I didn't see anything. But the feeling of being watched with pure hatred was enough for me. I often got the urge to leave the room, so I did. And I would go play a video game or something similar. Whatever it was seemed to leave the room after about an hour. This happened about 3 times. In the same home, a flat, really. 3 other strange things happened. The first was a shadow person sneaking along the walls of my bedroom during the day. Second, we had a dog, a small one named DJ. Think something about the size of a fox terrier, and you've got it. One day, I went to my room to grab something. It was during the day, and DJ followed me in. I heard a deep growling sound coming from under the bed. At first, I thought it must have been the dog, but I already knew DJ wasn't capable of making a noise that deep. It sounded either like a really big dog or a man doing his best, an honestly quite scary growling impression. It only happened once, but the experience stuck with me. Another strange thing involving the dog happened when he was too afraid to come into the living room. Next to my bedroom was a small room that we used as a computer room. DJ was in there at the time, and I heard him whimpering and pacing, even growling softly at something in the hallway. I called him, but he wouldn't move. I had to go in, pick him up, and carry him out of the room. All of this happened in the same flat. I lived there for a few years with my mom after the divorce. Things kept happening, and eventually I moved out to live with my dad. She moved a few months later, but I think she was the one carrying this thing with her. At my dad's place, a few odd things happened, but nothing like what I experienced while living with my mother. Story 4. I lived in a basement apartment with a roommate in college back in 2010. We were eating dinner in the living room one night while watching a movie, and his bedroom door, about 3 feet from the couch, was closed but not latched. As we were eating and watching, his door began to creak open, so we paused the movie and watched as it slowly swung all the way open. It stopped there, and we looked at each other and blamed it on a breeze or a loose hinge. Then the door started closing again, but this time, halfway through the movement, the handle turned until it was perpendicular to the floor. The door shut completely, and the handle slowly released, latching it closed. The handle was the kind that looks like the ones the velociraptors open in Jurassic Park. Story 5. My uncle's house in the far eastern part of New York was said to be haunted. The family who owned it in the 1800s had refused to leave it to their stableman and chose to sell it instead, and the stableman and the maid were rumored to haunt the place. We always joked about hearing footsteps or things moving at night, but since the house was so old, we just laughed it off. One night, my uncle's friend had her and her sister stay over. The friend woke up and noticed a maid carrying towels down the stairs. She later saw the same maid again, this time carrying what looked like a percolator. Impressed, she assumed my uncle had hired household staff. He is a neurologist in New York City and has a habit of spending a little extra. She went back to sleep and later came downstairs to find my uncle and her sister talking. She asked where the maid had gone because she thought the maid was cooking breakfast. My uncle had no idea what she meant and asked for a description. After hearing it, he laughed, led her to the living room, and pointed at an old photograph. She immediately recognized the woman. My uncle said, "Yeah, she's been dead for about 100 years. Story 6. I lived in a house for about 5 years that was haunted, but not in a malicious way, more like having a really awful roommate. I'd come home to find second-floor windows open while it was raining, or food containers in the fridge opened, even though I hadn't touched them yet. The worst part was that the ghost hated clocks. She absolutely hated them. I had antique cuckoo clocks that had worked for 50 years suddenly stop. Brand new wall clocks burned through batteries like candy. One morning, I found my watch on the floor with the crystal shattered, even though I knew I had gone to sleep wearing it. The thing that made me the angriest was a brand new Kit Kat clock I got for Christmas. She threw it off the wall. I was cooking when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the cat just fly. I turned around and it was across the kitchen, broken. It was brand new. Man, she was a bish. Story 7. I lived in an old haunted house in college. Things got so strange that everyone eventually moved out except for me and one roommate. Here are a few things that happened. 1. I woke up at 3 in the morning because my roommate's door kept opening and slamming shut. From my bed, I yelled for him to knock it off, then remembered I was the only one home that weekend. The moment I yelled, the slamming stopped, but the hippie beads hanging outside my closed door started swaying perfectly, yet violently, against the doorframe. They kept moving for about half an hour while I debated whether I should pop out my air conditioner and jump out the window. I just curled into the fetal position and waited for it to stop. 2. I woke up at 3 in the morning again, alone, to the Nintendo on the back porch playing loudly. I assumed some drunk kid had wandered in and started messing around. I grabbed a bat and walked toward the back of the house as the music grew louder and louder. But the moment I opened the door, everything went completely silent, even though it had been loud enough to wake me up. 3. I had friends over and told them the house was haunted. No one believed me, so I asked the ghost to do anything to prove it was there. The moment I asked, every light in the house started flickering for about a full minute. This was in the middle of the day, and everyone saw it. 4. Almost everyone who stayed at my house had sleep paralysis at least once. 5. Every time something spooky happened, the house would fill with the smell of strong, flowery old lady perfume. 6. The house had a door built into the floor that led to the basement. We kept a rug over it so no one would know it was there. Things constantly went missing and then turned up in the basement. The house still had an old coal chute from when it was heated with coal, and missing items were always neatly placed on the chute for us to retrieve. 7. My roommate had his own experiences. Once, while playing video games late at night, he saw a mist hovering in the kitchen before it drifted into the bathroom. That bathroom had a trap door leading to the attic, where we figured the old lady ghost liked to hang out. 8. My roommate stayed up late one night to lock the doors and turn off the lights. As he turned his back to the room and walked toward the door, someone breathed into his ear. Ha! He thought it was me, but I was asleep. He turned around, realized no one was there, and practically pissed himself before sprinting to his room. He was too terrified to go back out and turn off the lights or the TV. 9. We heard loud thumps in the attic at all hours. For our own sanity, we convinced ourselves squirrels must have gotten in. 10. Voices would wake us up in the middle of the night. I spent many mornings sitting on the front porch waiting for the sun to rise before I could bring myself to go back inside. 11. Years later, a friend of mine rented from the same landlord, same town, different house, and he and his roommates all moved out because that house was haunted too. I didn't think much of it until he mentioned that all the weird stuff there was accompanied by the same strong, flowery old lady perfume. A lot of people in that house had sleep paralysis as well. Edit. A lot of people mentioned sleep paralysis. I actually got it more than anyone else in the house, but I've never had it again in my life after moving out. Edit 2. The basement description kind of trailed off earlier. I never actually explored the whole thing. Absolutely not. The washer and dryer were by the stairs. Then there was a gap before you reached the old coal equipment, and behind that was nothing but darkness. The missing items were things like the TV remote, eyeglasses, an Xbox controller, and so on. Edit 3. Some comments mentioned mold in the AC causing hallucinations. I guess that's possible, but I doubt it. The AC was in my bedroom, yet the most vivid sleep paralysis episode I ever had happened during the day after a nap on the couch in the living room. Plus, I used that same AC unit in other apartments afterward, with 0 issues. Story 8. I watched one of our cats get pulled backwards about 5 feet by her tail. She was walking through the dining area when she suddenly started sliding backward, as if someone were holding onto her tail, except no one was there. She freaked out and tried to run, but couldn't at first because something held on for a moment before letting her go. I like to think that was the work of a 4 or 5-year-old girl ghost who hangs around and just wanted to play with the kitty. Story 9. I lived in a house that seemed to be haunted by doppelgangers. Every strange event involved someone we knew appearing where they absolutely shouldn't have been. Here's one example. I was a teenager, instant messaging my girlfriend with my webcam turned on. I kept the viewer open so I could see myself. Behind me were the stairs leading up on the left side of the frame and the entrance to the living room on the right. My younger sister usually fell asleep on the couch every night with the TV on and would wander upstairs in the middle of the night. At one point, in the webcam view, I saw my sister walk out of the living room and head up the stairs. What struck me as strange was that I didn't hear a single sound. It was an old Victorian house. Those wooden floors and stairs were loud as hell. Without saying anything to my girlfriend, I got up and checked the living room. My sister was still passed out on the couch. I sat back down and asked my girlfriend if she had seen anything on the camera. She said, "Yeah, I just saw your sister go upstairs." My family was getting ready to go somewhere. I was already in the car with my mom, and we were waiting on my sister, who was still inside the house. After a moment, she came out, got in the car, and just stared at me like, "What the hell?" I asked her what was wrong, and she said that right before she walked out, she thought I was still inside. She yelled up the stairs, "1 Lieutenant Obvious, we're leaving." And apparently I yelled back, "Okay, I'll be down in a minute." Edit. Some more examples since a lot of people asked. I mentioned a few of these in a lower comment, but I'll add them here for visibility. My mom woke up to someone tapping her foot, and she said a person was standing at the end of her bed, who faded out after a couple of seconds. She said it looked like me. I once woke up feeling like someone was under my covers, pressed up against me. When I said something, the blanket visibly deflated and the pressure vanished. I'm including this with the doppelganger stuff, because even though I didn't see what was there, it lay exactly how my girlfriend would have lain against me. When I was 22 and in the military, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. It took about a year after the diagnosis to separate, but I went home on leave for the holidays about a month later. Anyone with insulin-dependent diabetes usually carries some kind of kit. Mine was a black zip-up pouch with a glucometer, insulin pen, needles, and alcohol pads. Right after I left home to head back from leave, my mom texted to ask if I was missing my diabetic kit. I checked, I wasn't. She sent me a photo of a diabetic kit and asked if I recognized it. I had never seen it before in my life. Apparently, my sister walked into her bedroom and found it sitting outside her window, propped up like someone had set it there. And her bedroom was on the second floor. Nobody we know has diabetes. Story 10. When I was younger, my parents would often go to the neighboring city to run errands and be gone all day, from morning until night. Our living room was positioned so that you had to walk through it to get from the back door to either the front door or my parents' room. You'd pass right between the couch and the TV. One day, I was home alone, and my dad came in through the back door, walked in front of me across the room, and went into my parents' bedroom. Then he came back out, walked the same path right through my field of vision, and left again through the back door. He never looked at me, never glanced at the TV, just walked through in silence both times. Later, I asked him what he came home for or if he'd forgotten something, and he had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. He and my mom were an hour and a half away, and coming back home for something forgotten would have made no sense at all. He was also wearing completely different clothes when I talked to him later, compared to what I saw him wearing. Such a strange experience, and it only happened that one time. Story 11. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, I woke up one night and saw a large shadow standing at the foot of my bed. At the time, I was living with my dad in his very large terrace house, 5 floors, built in the 1800s. Every so often, something unexplainable would happen there. Footsteps when no one was around, voices from empty rooms, things like that. On the night this happened, it was just my dad and me in the house. My sister was staying with my mom. I woke up and noticed my bedroom door was wide open. I always slept with it closed. Then I became aware of a tall figure, around 7 feet, standing at the end of my bed. It looked like a solid shadow, just watching me. The moment it seemed to realize I was awake, the figure melted into the floor, and my door slammed shut. Understandably, I was more than a little traumatized. The next morning, I asked my dad if he had come into my room. He denied it completely. He's not the joking type, so he had no idea what I was talking about. Story 12. When I was younger, I used to take naps upstairs, but by the time I was about 8 years old, I absolutely refused to go up there. The upstairs had 2 large closets, attics. They ran from one side of the floor all the way to the other on both sides. Essentially long crawl spaces, each maybe 30 feet long. It started one day when a friend and I crawled from one side to the other with flashlights like kids do. Partway through, I saw a girl sitting in the corner, acting like she wanted to play with us. I know people always say that when they see a ghost, they aren't scared, just curious. Nope, I was terrified. She looked completely normal, blonde hair, a nice dress, friendly expression. But I stayed silent, kept crawling behind my friend, and got out of that crawl space as quickly as I could. When we got out, I told him what I saw. He said he didn't see anything, but he felt like he really didn't want to go back in. After that, my parents would occasionally send me upstairs to grab something, and every time I got up there, I'd see the crawl space doors swing open, like they were trying to lure me inside. I'd lose toys and couldn't find them anywhere. Then, out of nowhere, my parents would be pulling down Christmas presents from the attic, and we'd find some of my missing toys up there. I remember being 8 years old my parents still asleep one morning, and I leashed up my dog so we could go take on the monster in the attic. My dog, who is usually up for absolutely anything, refused to step off the top stair into the attic, just froze and wouldn't move. My parents never believed anything I told them about that house. All the strange things that happened, they blamed on me, leaving lights on, toys showing up in weird places, things I knew for a fact I didn't do. Anyway, we moved out when I was 10. Not a week later, the new owners called my parents to ask if the house was haunted. Their daughter slept upstairs and said she had been playing at night with a blonde-haired girl. My parents laughed at how crazy the new homeowners must be. To make a long story short, the girl started appearing in other parts of the house for them. They kept in contact with us. They would look up while watching TV and see the girl sitting on their daughter's lap, and so on. They looked up the previous owners online and discovered an old dressmaker had lived there, and sure enough, there was a picture of a little girl wearing one of the woman's dresses. The family that moved in was completely torn apart by the events. They got divorced, the father stayed in the house, and tragically ended up taking his own life there. Story 13. I used to live in an old 5-bedroom house with 6 other people. My SO and I shared one of the rooms. One night in my 20s, I saw a stranger in our room. It wasn't something I could clearly make out, but I knew it was there, standing in the corner. My SO was asleep beside me. My eyes were open, and yet the presence felt as real as anything I could have seen. I shut my eyes, hoping it would disappear. When I opened them again, it was no longer in the corner. Now it was standing right next to the bed, watching me. I squeezed my eyes shut a second time, wishing it away, and a wave of relief washed over me. When I dared to look again, it was gone. I only saw it one more time, briefly, on the stairs. Just a flicker. There and gone in an instant. Story 14. I live in a house built in the 1800s. It survived 2 world wars, so I imagine it's seen a lot. One of the previous owners had 2 sons, and both of them passed away by self-harm. A lot of strange things happen here. Our animals, a dog and some parrots, will suddenly wake from naps and follow something with their heads, just as they would if I were walking around. Before I switched rooms in the house, my brother had a room he refused to sleep in because he would hear voices. He ended up sleeping with my parents until he got my old room, and since then, he's been fine sleeping there. There's also a whole floor we don't use. I sleep in the attic, and I have to pass through that unused floor to get there. Weird, I know. I have a motion-activated light on the stairs leading to that floor, and sometimes it switches on in the middle of the night when no one is walking under it. There are also cold spots throughout the house. Story 15. In 2012, my stepfather overdosed on heroin and dropped dead in the hallway of his condo apartment. My mom had to move out shortly afterward, since they were already behind on mortgage payments. A few months later, my lease ended. I was barely making ends meet, and I couldn't find a new roommate. My mom offered me the key to the condo so I could squat there for a few months until I saved enough to get my own place. I took the offer and moved in. After about a month, I fell asleep in the living room and had this dream of him standing in the hallway, facing me. He was smiling, laughing even, and made one of his stupid jokes. It wasn't disturbing at all, just bittersweet. Then I suddenly woke up after feeling pressure stroking down my head and back. When I opened my eyes, nothing was around me, and it scared the hell out of me. As a skeptical person who doesn't believe in the paranormal, I'm sure it was some kind of sensory hallucination. Still, it was nice to see him in a dream again. Made me tear up typing this. Rest in peace, Darren. Mildly interesting fact. He died on July 13th, 2012, on a Friday the 13th. Story 16. I'm not exactly sure what to believe, since most of the paranormal stuff happened to my dad, but I definitely saw and heard some creepy things while living in this house during my teens. We would very frequently get this heavy sense of anxiety and foreboding in the house. That alone isn't paranormal, of course, but it made being there feel really uneasy. I once read that radon exposure can cause anxiety, and the house did have a radon problem, so maybe that explains part of it. But I also used to hear footsteps around the house when I was home alone, and I constantly had that feeling like someone was watching me. My dad got the worst of it. His bedroom was right by the basement, and he said he could hear noises coming from down there at night. I never heard anything myself, but I'm an extremely deep sleeper. Then there were the classic slams, bangs, and crashes throughout the house. He also claimed he would hear knocking on the cellar door. Sometimes he said he heard a woman screaming. Supposedly, every family that had ever lived there experienced something. There are 3 distinct things that really stand out. 1. The night before we moved out, my dad says he woke up because he felt a sudden, hard tapping on his head. 2. My brother's girlfriend was staying over while my dad and I were gone. When we came back, her daughter was terrified because she said she saw a shadow standing in the corner of the room. I chalked it up to a kid's imagination running wild, but she was genuinely shaken. 3. One time, my dad was practicing with his band in the basement and was expecting me home from a Christmas party. He claims he heard heavy footsteps upstairs and assumed it was me, so he went up to say hello, and nobody was there. I didn't get home until about a half hour later. It eventually got so bad that my dad had the house blessed. The priest supposedly refused to enter at first because he said the place made him uneasy. This was around the time I was becoming an atheist, so I didn't really believe any of that, but I absolutely felt the constant uneasiness and heard the random noises. I just never experienced the screaming or the knocking that my dad insists he heard. At one point, we had some people from TAPS, associated with, but not on the Ghost Hunters show, come by to sweep the house. We got some of the usual orb pictures, which both my brother and I thought were dumb as hell. But at one point, being a bit of an edgelord and thinking I had psychic powers, I told them to take a picture in a specific spot. The result was an image of what appeared to be a ghostly bust of a person with a demented face. We tried to explain it as a reflection from the washing machine, but it looked way too much like a person. If I can dig up the image, I'll post it. But I'll have to go through my dad's Facebook account. We also have an entry on the website, The Shadowlands, that I submitted. P.S. There was one hilarious instance. I came home from school one day, immediately felt that uneasy, being watched sensation, and my blood went cold. I was starting to panic a little when I turned around, and there was my grandmother, laughing her bum off at how she had scared me. She had been there the whole time, and somehow I had walked right past her without noticing. Miss you, Graham. Story 17. Not exactly haunted per se, but I experienced a fair amount of activity in my dad's house. 1. We had a bunk bed in the first room. I slept on top, and my dad slept on the bottom. One night, I had a dream where I woke up and saw a bunch of people in the hallway who all looked like my dad. I asked them who they were, and they only said, "We are not from the holy." Freaked me out completely. 2. Eventually, we dismantled the bunk bed, divided it into 2 separate beds, and moved them to the last bedroom. I would also sleep with my dad. Whenever he turned off the lights, I could feel a group of people staring at me in the darkness. It wasn't a benevolent stare. It was terrifying. Ever since then, I've had trouble sleeping alone. 3. To give some context for this next one, my dad's house is divided like this. Garage, basically the front door. Kitchen, dining room, living room. They were all together in the same spot, hallway. It had a gate that closed off the previously mentioned room. First bedroom, bathroom, second bedroom, third bedroom. Now that I've explained the structure, this is what happened. I was brushing my teeth early in the morning because my dad, my grandpa, and I had to go somewhere. My dad was getting dressed in the first bedroom, my grandpa was changing in the second bedroom, and my sister and grandma were asleep in the third bedroom. The gate to the living room was closed. As I'm brushing my teeth, a cup starts sliding down the hallway. It stops right in front of the bathroom door, then suddenly gets hurled at me. I barely dodge it, completely shocked. I checked immediately. Everyone was still in their rooms, and the gate was still closed. 4. This one happened in the kitchen, dining, living room area. It was 10 at night. My grandpa and grandma were doing their Bible study. My sister and I were watching TV, and my dad was doing something. I don't remember what. Out of nowhere, a bright flash lit up the center of the room. No one was outside. No one had a camera or a phone out, and the TV wasn't showing anything that could have caused it. Everything had been completely normal up until that moment. The only thing my dad could think to do was immediately kneel down and pray. 5. Not my experience, but my dad's cousins. Sometime after my dad left because of Hurricane Maria, his cousin and her mother went to the house to take care of a few things. Cleaning, I think. She was in the garage when she suddenly felt a strong, negative presence. Not just uneasy. She said it felt like something absolutely did not want her there. She basically told it she wasn't dealing with that, finished what she had to do, and left. Afterward, she said she always felt something watching her from my dad's house. 6. Another one from my dad's cousin. One night, she woke up with sleep paralysis. When she looked to her side, she saw what she described as a malevolent presence, like a shadowy whirlpool, right next to her bed. It was slowly pulling the covers up toward her face, like it was trying to suffocate her just a little. She kept trying to speak, but couldn't. When she finally got control of her voice, she yelled, "May the Lord rebuke you!" The presence dissipated immediately and retreated back toward the house. Story 18. A woman had 2 husbands die on her in the same house. That's the house my dad decided to buy. The first husband hanged himself from the rafters in the garage, and the second fell ill and died in his bed in the basement. I lived in the basement room and often felt like I was being watched. The bedroom had a secret storage room behind a bookshelf with a locking latch. I would always wake up to find the door wide open. It happened so often that I routinely woke up cold, got out of bed, and shut and locked the latch in the middle of the night. For the longest time, I thought it was my dad or my stepbrothers messing with me, but it wasn't. My stepbrother now occupies that room, and he says it still happens to him, and that he has even seen the door open on its own. There are no air vents or anything like that, so I ruled out wind. In the garage, I would often see light coming from under the door through the crack, only to open it and find complete darkness. I heard sounds in there more than once, only to discover saw blades clanging together and slightly rotating where they hung on the wall. I didn't think much of it at first, but when things start moving more than once, you can't help glancing up at the rafters and wondering. Story 19. About 2 weeks before we moved, my dad and I toured our house, and I noticed a man painting the water heater, which I thought was strange, but I was only about 10, so I didn't question it. We moved in on a Wednesday, and my parents let me stay home from school until the following Monday. They kept me busy with coloring books and a new dollhouse. In my brand new box of 64 crayons, there wasn't a blue crayon at all. There were only 63. One day, I went downstairs, into the basement, and my blue crayon was sitting next to the hot water heater. Scribbled on it in blue was "Hi Fit Nurse, Kevin." I had no idea what to make of it. When I finally started school, my new classmates said, "Oh my God, do you live in Kevin's house? Your house is going to be haunted." It turned out Kevin was an 8-year-old boy who had lived in our house before us and had been hit by a car in the front yard. He would leave notes if you set out a pen and paper, open and close doors, adjust the old thermostat, the kind with a knob, and always turn on Christmas music when the season came around. We had a swing set in the backyard, and even on the hottest, calmest summer days, only the left swing would move back and forth. We also had this not-so-bright cat that I locked in my bedroom at night. Every morning, my parents would open the door to let him out, and then close it again. One night, I woke up to the cat meowing at the door. As I sat up, the door opened on its own, and the cat hissed and bolted out. The next morning, I asked my mom why they hadn't closed my door, and she said they hadn't opened it at all. The last story happened when I was very upset and depressed one year, during Christmas break. Out of nowhere, the police showed up at our house. The officer said he had been patrolling the neighborhood and felt like something was wrong at our home. I am absolutely certain Kevin had something to do with it. Story 20. This is happening right now in the house I'm living in here in New Jersey. About a week ago, at about 3 a.m, I woke up after falling asleep on the sofa. I got up to turn the heat off and wander around a bit. I was yawning, rubbing my eyes, and just about to head to bed when I noticed a sound getting louder and louder. It was one of those moments where you don't register the noise until it's suddenly impossible to ignore. I turned my head and saw the kettle boiling by itself. You have to push the button down, and when it's on, it glows blue. The blue light was shining clearly, casting the shadow of the pressed down button. I panicked, thinking maybe I had turned it on without remembering, so I tried to rationalize it. But before I could stop myself, I said out loud, "But I don't want tea or coffee." And at that exact moment, the kettle clicked off. I literally heard the switch. It wasn't at the end of the boil either. I'm English and used to 220-watt outlets that do everything twice as fast, so I know it was in the middle of the boil. As soon as I said that, I felt guilty. Like I shouldn't have been scared, like it was just a friendly offer. 2 days later, I was with a friend at the dining room table, both of us at least 5 feet away and around the corner from the kettle. Nobody else was in the house when it started boiling again. My friend rushed over and pointed out that the button had been pushed. I felt so relieved that I wasn't insane, and I explained that the same thing had happened to me at night. A few nights ago, I was lying in bed and could hear a conversation at 4 a.m, with no one around and the neighbors 20 feet away on either side. Then the kettle started boiling again. I was annoyed, so I literally said out loud, "Please stop boiling the kettle. We have people asleep upstairs." And it clicked off again. It could just be a faulty kettle and coincidence. I don't believe in ghosts whatsoever and have never seen or felt anything before. It's just freaky, but it isn't scary, just my first instinct. I feel as though someone is trying to take care of me, like when you were sick off school and lying in bed and your mom or dad would look after you and bring you soup and things. Very, very strange. Story 21. I'll begin by saying I tend to have a skeptical frame of mind when it comes to anything paranormal, but enough things have happened in the past year to make me at least question that and consider the possibility that this is real and not just my daughter's active imagination. These events have happened only in the house my husband and I bought in June of 2017, which was built in the 1920s. First, in October of 2017, I was laying her down for bed in the dark, with only moonlight lighting the room. She pointed across the room and asked, "Mom, who's that guy?" I looked for a toy or anything she might be referring to, but saw nothing, so I asked, "What guy, honey?" She said he was right there, and gestured toward the closed bedroom door. Still curious, I asked what he was doing, hoping I could connect it to some recent pretend play or a familiar toy. She said he was hiding. I asked if he was scared. She said, "No, he's hiding." Creepy. Through the whole exchange, she was calm and cheerful, not scared at all. What made it even stranger was that she was 2 at the time and didn't really engage in pretend play or storytelling yet. And, as I said, there were no toys in sight. From there, it was just a funny toddler story we told our friends and family, and we affectionately named him That Guy. It became the umbrella name we used for any other episodes or weird things that happened around the house. That guy was pulling a prank. Next, in January or February of 2018, I was again laying her down for bed along with her then 6-month-old brother. We were doing our usual cuddle-up night-night talk when she said something along the lines of, "Now it's time for bed, just me and you and him and her." My skeptical mind would argue that him could have been her little brother, but at the time she was still adjusting to having a sibling and rarely mentioned him, and he hadn't been included in the conversation we were having. What really threw me was her. Who was her? The only other female in the house is our cat, and she wasn't in the room. There were no toys in bed with us, and none nearby that she could have been referring to. A little later that spring, a new name came into the conversation. Mr. Longneck. Short backstory. My daughter has this odd habit of touching necks. Sometimes it's cuddly, sometimes it's while she's playing. We can't really explain it other than kids just do strange things sometimes, and it started before we moved into this house. Anyway, she was being put down for a nap and was a little high-strung. She was doing her usual neck-grabbing thing and suddenly did it a bit tougher than usual, not enough to hurt, and said in a growly voice, "Mr. Longneck, Mr. Longneck." I had never heard her use that name before, and it isn't a character from any YouTube or Netflix show she watches. So I asked who Mr. Longneck was. She just giggled and brushed it off, and was asleep 10 minutes later. That was the moment I started getting genuinely creeped out by her stories. In April of 2018, my husband found a time capsule in one of our heating vents, and we spent the afternoon looking through it. There had been a fire in our home in 2009, which we already knew about, and no one had been hurt. During the renovation after the fire, the owners at the time found a bunch of old items in the walls and included them along with some pictures of the fire and a couple of newspaper clippings. Among the old items were a pack of pearl buttons, some store catalogs from the 1940s, and a small notebook with handwritten names inside. I assume these were the names of the original inhabitants, and I plan to find the book again and look into the history behind the names as well as the home itself. After going through everything, my husband and I started to wonder if there is anything paranormal happening. Maybe these objects are holding on to some kind of energy or something. I know this is long, but we're almost done. In about October of 2018, I was driving to my mother's house with only my son and daughter in the car. Along the way, my daughter, now 3, asked from the back seat, "Mom, is that Grandpa?" I said, "Where?" She pointed to the empty front seat and said, "Right there." I told her Grandpa was at home, since he had recently moved in with us due to health issues. There was no one around on the street or the sidewalks for her to have been pointing at either. There have been other minor things that have happened, but these were the biggest ones worth describing in detail. I posted this in another subreddit as well, and was advised to engage her more in conversation when it comes up. We've done that to a degree, just to help her feel comfortable talking about it, but I never pushed too hard. I didn't want to lead her or encourage her to offer answers, just to keep the conversation going. One day, though, and a few times after, I decided to ask her about it directly. Below is a brief summary of what she has said over roughly the past month. Me: "Can you tell me about that guy?" Daughter: "What guy?" Me: "You don't remember that guy?" Daughter: "No." Me: "What about Mr. Longneck?" Daughter: "Oh, yeah." Face lights up. Me: "Can you tell me about him?" And various other questions led to Mr. Longneck is a grown-up. He wears a monster clothes and a hat. He is nice, but also scary. He says trick or treat, but doesn't wear a costume. He lives far away and goes with Santa in the sky to his house where he belongs. She says he comes to our house at nap time, which she no longer has, but it was usually in the afternoon. He knocks on our big door, the patio door, and walks through the kitchen. These were her exact words, and while she was telling me this, she pointed out the path from the door to one of our living room windows. I asked what he says or does, and among a few things, she mentioned that he plays in the kitchen with her using the spinny cow toy. This is one of those Fisher-Price pull-string farm toys. She never plays with it. I rarely see it, and I have never seen it in the kitchen. The specific details definitely caught my attention. I also asked if he ever brought a friend to see if I could follow up on the her mentioned earlier. He does bring a friend. She is a little girl, not a grown-up, and has yellow hair like me. She is never scared during these conversations, although she pulls back a bit when I ask about his neck or why it is long. So that's pretty much it. Thanks if you made it through the whole thing. I welcome any comments or advice. We have saged the house, but it was quite a while ago, and we plan to do it again. We will probably also get rid of the old items from the walls once we learn more about them, which is sad because they are part of the home's history. I'm looking forward to hearing what you all think. Story 22. A little backstory. Growing up, my brother and I lived with our single mother. The house was a small 500 square foot home, but we were young, so it didn't feel like a big deal. My mom remarried, and the newlyweds decided to tear down the old house and build a ranch on the same land. After we moved back in, strange, but still somewhat explainable, things started happening. One of the strangest moments happened when my brother and I were in the house alone. We were hanging out at the island in the kitchen, talking about whatever teenage boys talk about, when I heard the faintest whisper of someone saying my brother's name. I figured I was just hearing things. About 30 seconds later, I heard it again, this time a little louder. My brother was talking when the second whisper came, and he paused, like he had heard it too. Then, about 15 seconds after that, a raspy voice said his name clearly and angrily. We looked at each other, and he asked, "Did someone just say my name?" I told him I had heard it more than once. He said, "3 times, right?" We grabbed our coats and went to get Burger King. Story 23. We moved from the United States to the United Kingdom, and our parents bought an old beat-up house. It still had lead pipes for the water, a nightmare on its own. Work on the house started while we were living there. We began seeing bright lights in the corners of rooms at night. We heard footsteps on floorboards, even though the whole place was carpeted. I was about 6 at the time and started waking up in the night to see a little girl who would dance on my chest of drawers. I was terrified. My mom brushed it off as me dreaming. The workmen complained about strange things too. Tools being moved and the unsettling feeling of being watched. After about a year of this, my eldest sister's friend stayed overnight. She woke the entire house, screaming, saying a little girl had been in her room and had pulled her from the bed. She left immediately and refused to ever come back. My mom finally decided she needed to do something and got some advice. She was told that our family should treat the presences as part of the household. So when we got home, we'd call out, "Hi, we're home. Did you have a good day?" Over time, the house settled and the trouble stopped. We later found out that a little girl had died in the house from asthma. My parents still live there, and it's a beautiful, homely place now. Story 24. I used to live in a big house, 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a basement, and more, by myself. I was there as a hiring perk and to look after the place for my boss, who lived out of state but owned the home. It was one of those win-win situations. The first couple of months were fine, but when winter came, I started hearing things from the second floor. I lived almost exclusively on the first floor, so the noises stood out. It began with small bumps and bangs above where I kept my computer, and eventually turned into distinct footsteps moving back and forth across the second floor. I had gone upstairs from time to time and knew there were unfinished areas up there. One place always stood out, an unfinished room that acted as a kind of walk-in closet for one of the upstairs bedrooms. It was attached to the garage attic, which was completely unlit. When I went up to investigate the noises, the door to that room was open. I shut it and locked it. 2 nights later, more noises. Footsteps moving from the unfinished room to the bathroom, then nothing. The worst part was the door. The door to the unfinished room would not stay closed or locked. I tried everything. Eventually, I pushed the bed up against it to keep it from opening. That seemed to work. A few months went by without the door moving, though I would still find it unlocked all the time. As time passed, I began hearing noises all over the house, mostly footsteps, but sometimes a sudden thump with no explanation. I cannot describe how unnerving it is to hear light tapping up and down the hallway from the other side of a bathroom door during your morning shower. I eventually moved out, and another employee moved in to take my place. His stay lasted only about a month. The story he told me was that one morning, while he was shaving before work, he heard a loud slam, like someone had dropped a heavy stack of books right outside his bedroom door, followed by heavy footsteps running down the hall. He refuses to stay there now, and no one in the company will live in the house anymore. Story 25. It was my childhood home in rural Missouri, and I'm incredibly glad I don't live there anymore. After some frightening things happened, not even the ones listed below, I packed up and left. I couldn't stay there another day. Oh geez, let's see. And keep in mind that I lived alone in the middle of the woods on more than 50 acres from the ages of 15 to 22. I heard all kinds of things, screaming in the basement, a child and an older man laughing while I was in the shower, furniture being dragged around on the porch, music playing out of nowhere with glasses clinking and groups of people chatting. Lights would turn on when I left the house for a short time. That happened for years. Important documents would go missing over the weekend, and after searching the room 2 or 3 times, I'd walk back in to find them neatly stacked in the center of the table. All my cabinets would be open when I came home. At night, I would feel what seemed like someone sitting on my bed and then getting up a moment later. My blinds would start shaking. There's more, and even a strange potential alien story that I'm not getting into. But yeah, creepy stuff. I hated that house. Story 26. I lived in a house built in 1938. I would wake up and sit up in bed every single night between 2:59 and 3:01 in the morning. Sometimes I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, but I chalked it up to being tired or not wearing my glasses. One night, the curtain on my closet moved. I pulled the lamp chain and the room lit up. My husband thought I was imagining things. I didn't see anything, so I pulled the chain again and turned the lamp off. I tried to go back to sleep, but a few minutes later, I heard the lamp chain tapping against the lamp base. When I reached out to stop it, something cold touched me. It didn't feel like a hand or a finger, more like a wet washcloth. We moved soon after because of a relocation, and once we left that house, I stopped waking up every night and never had any strange feelings again. Story 27. I always preface this story by saying I am a huge skeptic of anything like this, but I have never found a way to explain it. My sister and her then 4-year-old daughter moved into a townhouse apartment complex. My niece, now 14 and still remembering this vividly, ran into my sister's room not long after moving in, screaming about a man in her room, yelling at her. My sister jumped out of bed and searched everywhere for someone or something out of place. She found nothing. The doors and windows were still locked, It happened a couple more times over the next few nights. My niece did not want to sleep there. She would not go into her room at all. One day, my sister was chatting with another mom at the complex playground, and the woman mentioned how creepy that was, considering the man who had overdosed in that apartment a few years earlier. Apparently, his son's room was now my niece's room. So, my mom did some digging and found the man's name, which led her to his obituary. She pulled up the photo from the obituary and called my niece into the computer room. My niece got half a step into the room, saw the picture on the monitor, and ran out screaming about the man. I still have absolutely no explanation for how she recognized his face. Story 28. I have lived in 2 haunted places. The first was a house we stayed in for a short time when I was about 12. Every night we heard what sounded like rats running across the attic, so my mom had an exterminator put out a ton of sticky traps. We never caught anything, not even a bug. Then I started waking up with random injuries a few times a month, like scratches even though my nails were short. The final straw was when I woke up with what looked like a cigarette burn on my face. The scar has thankfully faded, but it was extremely upsetting. We sold the house and got out of there as fast as we could. When I was in my mid-20s, I lived in a haunted apartment. The spirits there were actually nice. I lived alone in a 4-plex, and my direct neighbor was almost never home. He ended up in prison a lot. The downstairs neighbors never made noise at night. One worked evenings, and the other took Klonopin every night. It was a strange neighborhood. I would hear people whispering in my hallway nearly every night. At first, I would get up and search for the source of the voices. The parking lot was quiet. No one was outside in the courtyard, and the neighbors were either gone or asleep. It happened every single night. Eventually, I started saying, "Can you keep it down? I'm trying to sleep." And the voices would stop immediately. Every time. They also opened my blinds in the mornings before they thought I would be awake. A few times, I woke up early on my day off to use the bathroom and saw all the blinds in the living room open. I was confused, but when I came out of the bathroom a few minutes later, they were all closed again. This happened often. A random happening that was the scariest thing I have ever experienced. My husband died, and I had him cremated. I was still young and had no children, so I moved on after only about 6 months. My now husband had just started staying over at my place when the strange things began. First, I saw a shadow person in the mirror on my wall. Then, one night, my clock fell off the wall. Finally, I had a terrifying episode of sleep paralysis and saw the same shadow figure again while I was unable to move. I had never been so scared in my entire life. I eventually decided to spread the ashes of my deceased husband, and everything stopped after that. My late husband had been a mean man who blamed me after his friend assayed me, and he ultimately ended his life by refusing to take the insulin for his type 1 diabetes, because he wanted to spite me for kicking him out. It makes a grim kind of sense that he would haunt me once I moved on. Story 29. I lived in an older home for about 5 or so years. My stepdad, who knew the man who had lived there before us, told me he had hanged himself in the attic. I did not think much of it, at least not until I heard the footsteps. Like clockwork, every night at 3 a.m, I would hear footsteps walking the length of the attic, passing right over my room. The steps were heavy, and you could clearly tell the pace was that of a normal walk. It sounded like a man deep in thought, contemplating his next move. If it really was the former owner, were those his final moments playing out every night before his fateful decision? Who can say? There were other strange experiences, but those footsteps, going on for years, still freak me out. Story 30. From ages 5 to 17, I lived in a house with activity. It was all pretty basic, run-of-the-mill stuff. Footsteps, voices, lights turning on and off, doors opening and closing, batteries draining, and so on. If we started renovating, which we almost always were, the activity would ramp up and things would start getting thrown. I got used to it. They never hurt us, so we just let it be. Even my father started believing after a while. But the worst thing they ever did happened while we were moving in. I was 5. My friend and I were playing in the only finished room in the basement while my parents moved things inside. My friend's parents were helping. Suddenly, the door to the room slammed shut. No wind, no draft, no explanation. Then the lock clicked and someone started laughing. We were stuck in that room for 2 hours. Edit. I also forgot about the time my Newfoundland, the sweetest dog I have ever met, stood in the doorway of my parents' room with every hackle raised, barking at nothing. Her full "get the hell out" bark. Story 31. The house I grew up in had a slightly strange design. All the bedrooms were clustered together at one end of the house, and the kitchen and living room were at the other. The two areas were connected by a long, narrow hallway with a bathroom in the middle, and what felt like roughly 900 closets on either side. My bedroom door was at the very end of the hall, with 2 other bedroom doors facing each other across the hall, just before mine. Basically, if you were sitting in the living room, you could look straight down the hallway and see my bedroom door. A lot of strange and frightening things happened in that house, but the one thing we could never rationalize or explain away was the darkness at the end of the hall. As I said, the hallway was long and narrow, paneled in dark wood, so it always looked a bit dim. But with the living room lights on, there was still plenty of light to see down the hall and make out my bedroom door. Yet sometimes, while we were sitting in the living room, we would suddenly get the feeling that we were being watched, or that something was about to happen. When that would come over us, the end of the hallway would be completely blacked out. It was as if someone had dropped a curtain over the far end. You could see partway down, and then there was just darkness. When this happened, our 3 little dogs, God bless them, would go to the mouth of the hallway and sit in a line across it, staring into the blackness. Sometimes they barked a little or growled, but mostly they just sat and stared. Once in a while, one would get brave enough to walk down the hall, but they never made it more than halfway to the darkness before stopping and backing up. They would walk backward up the hall, never turning their backs on whatever they were watching. After a while, the oppressive feeling would lift, the darkness would vanish, and the dogs would wander off. This didn't happen often, but compared to all the normal spookiness in that house, things disappearing, objects flying off shelves, strange voices or breezes, that was the one thing we could never convince ourselves was just in our heads. Story 32. When I was young, my family moved into the most haunted house on an Indian reservation in 2001. The whole town knew about it, and I grew up being called the kid who lives in the haunted house. We were a white family, and the house had been abandoned for years before we moved in. It was apparently built on an Indian burial ground. When the tribe heard that someone had bought the house, they insisted on cleansing it before we moved in. The tribal leaders and the shaman arrived, walked toward the house, and then stopped. They refused to enter and were forced to perform the ritual in the front yard because they did not feel it was safe. We had the occasional spooky noise, but it was an old, rickety house, so we didn't think much of it. We also always had dogs and cats to blame unexplained sounds on. Years passed, and we continued to ignore what most people would have considered creepy or haunted, at least until about a year ago. The spirits must have had enough and wanted to be heard. A friend of mine was down the road at a mutual friend's house and was too drunk to drive all the way home. We lived pretty far out in the country. He called me, and I insisted he sleep on my couch for the night. He showed up around 2 a.m. The whole house was asleep except for the 2 of us. I got him some water and blankets, set him up a comfortable spot on the couch, and we both went to bed. We woke up early the next morning, and as he was getting ready to leave, he grabbed his $400 pair of Jordan high-top retros. He started to put them on, and then abruptly stopped, realizing there was something inside his left shoe. He reached in and pulled out a small chunk of dog poop and a crumpled-up tissue. Everyone was still asleep. No one had woken up during the night. There were only 3 suspects: my mom, my dad, or my brother. None of whom would ever be rude enough to do something like that. My dogs never had trouble going to the bathroom in the house, let alone aiming perfectly into a shoe. To this day, we still have no idea how it got there. The tissue made my friend believe someone was playing a prank on him, but I swore on my first child that no one in my family would ever even consider it. We had no choice but to blame the spirits. I lived in that house for 17 years, and that was the most unexplainable thing that ever happened. My friend is still convinced the house is haunted and refuses to spend the night anymore. I try to joke about it every now and then, but he gets uneasy just thinking about it. It still bothers me that we will never know how it happened, but at least I can say my ghosts have a good sense of humor. Story 33. I lived in a haunted house for 10 years. I had 5 kids while living there, and every one of them saw the man in the hat on the wall. They all saw him between the ages of 2 and 5. Once my kids turned 6, they stopped seeing him. One night, I heard my son screaming for me. He was 5, and when I ran to him, he begged me to make his dresser drawers stop. I asked, "Stop what, honey?" And he said, "They keep opening and slamming shut. I can't sleep because it's too noisy." Things were moved all the time, and things were lost all the time. The spirit did not like babysitters and would torment every single one. The most violent episode happened when I let my 15-year-old brother watch my kids. We got home around 2 in the morning and found my brother sitting on the steps in the hallway between the front door and the kids' bedrooms, shaking and crying. He said that after he got the kids into bed, the pounding started, everywhere, all over the house. At one point, it was so bad that he went outside to see if people were hitting the house. There was no one there. He had gone out through the back door to check. When he walked back inside, he saw the reflection of someone in the mirror walking up the steps toward the kids' rooms. He ran, thinking someone had slipped in while he was outside. He checked everywhere, but no one was in the house. When he was upstairs, he saw a shadowy figure streak around the corner near the steps. Then he heard the front door open and close. He ran down the stairs, but the door was closed and locked. He spent the next 3 hours chasing that shadow and hearing doors open and shut. He never babysat for us again. No one would. I had lights shatter above our heads, and my children would laugh and talk to people in their rooms. Neighbors called us at all hours of the night, asking if we were okay, because they saw groups of people in our yard and sneaking around our windows. The police became so used to receiving the same 911 call that they eventually stationed an officer behind our house between 2 and 3 in the morning to watch the property. There were so many frightening experiences, and the nightmares I had while living there were absolutely terrifying. We eventually moved, and the people who moved in after us stayed for only a month. They said it was too scary. The house has now been vacant for 8 years. I have more stories, but I think I've already written a novel here. Story 34. I don't live in a haunted house, at least I hope not. But I work at a restaurant that used to be a family home in the 1870s. The place is genuinely haunted and well known for it. The other employees, along with the owners, have their own stories that are pretty unsettling, but I only have one. The Lady in Black. A few people have seen her, including me, and the way all our stories line up makes it hard to dismiss as anything but paranormal. For a bit of context, sorry if this gets confusing. The restaurant is divided into 4 rooms since it was converted from a house. 2 rooms are at the front, both connected by a small lobby area. and a hallway runs from the back of one to the back of the other, with the remaining 2 rooms adjacent to that hallway. The room at the far right side of the house, the one adjacent to the hallway, is said to be the most haunted because it's separated from the others and just generally eerie. However, I think the room down the hall from it is even more haunted. It has nice blue walls and a large window overlooking a small side garden where a groundhog lives. If I were a ghost, I'd pick that room too. Anytime I pass by that room quickly, which I do a lot because my pay depends on how much work I do, I see a figure in there about 9 times out of 10. I'm not sure how I can tell, but I can always make out that it's a woman in a black dress, and she's incredibly sad. I always double back to check, and there's never anyone there. She only appears when the room is empty. I later learned that one of the women who lived in the house had a son who died, possibly in the house, and I don't think she ever got over it. There's so much sadness. I don't think I've ever felt such pain. I can't help but feel sorry for her, alive or dead. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.